I know in the introduction you talked about you started this process 7 years ago, but I was wondering if you could start by telling us what the kernel of the idea was and how you knew you wanted to make this film.
Well, I have been thinking about the film for longer than that. In fact, when I was graduating at university, I did two short documentaries on video. That's how all the footage was shot at the time, and even if you look at my feature films, Neighboring Sounds and Aquarius, they feature some brief sequence in abandoned cinemas, and I think that's a recurring theme. But at some point, I went back to the tapes, and I thought that time was generous to the images, and then I actually digitized all the because I had to update technically the images into digital, and I did it myself. I got a kind of special VCR which is connected to the computer, and I digitized each and every tape because I didn't want to send a box to some company and get the footage back. I really wanted to handle the tapes myself and look at the images, and it was a kind of a strong, even emotional process, having a look at myself 30 years ago and spending time with Alexandre, who was one of the best human beings I was lucky enough to have met in my life, and so many other memories and friends, and so that's how the heart of the film really began. Also, I have to say that at some point, me and my partner Emily, we decided to move. We were going to move to another place, to a new house, a new apartment, and the 1 year we understood we were going to move, it had an interesting effect on myself, and I began to realize. I realized I had shot many films in that place. And I went back to the tapes again, and I thought that would be the beginning of the film, to almost do a kind of Soviet montage of one place shot from every conceivable angle and every format during 20 years, from VHS to 35 millimeter, which is what I used in Neighboring Sounds.
Well, I thought it worked really terrifically. One of the other things that really struck me about the film was the way you combined the personal story, the story of Recife, and the story of kind of cinema. I was wondering how you worked on kind of melding all those together in the process of the film.
Yeah, I really think that all of us, I think each of us, we have our own personal story, but our own personal history, I think it inevitably is intertwined with the history of where you live and the history of the country where you live. Yeah, and it comes out naturally. I think if you scratch the surface, you will be looking at not only personal history but also the history of where you live and the history of the society you're the byproduct of, and I think that came out naturally. So at some point, I think we were editing, me and Mateus, the editor, the sequence with the UFA cinema, which was a project from the Germans in the 1930s, and then suddenly we were looking at the Second World War. But we had begun the film talking about this home, and I thought that was an interesting interesting dynamics for a film. You know, you begin very small, and then suddenly you're talking about global politics in a way, and Goebbels and that other name.
And then I have to ask about the closing scene. I just watched it again right now, and it just brings such a smile to my face. So I was wondering how you decided to end the film on that note, the superhero.
Yeah, as I said, I spent 7 years making the film, and at some point, maybe 5 years ago, I thought that the film should end with me catching a taxi after a day's work and going back home, and I even wanted to use Herb Alpert's Rise, which is a great track from 1979. It's really groovy but also very sad in a way. It's I really like the way it turned out in the mix and at the end of the film. But at the day we were going to shoot, I got a bit of a cold feet because you spend a lot of money and you get equipment and you have the actor, and I hadn't really written dialogue for the scene. So I sat down and wrote dialogue, and that just came out, just came out like that. We established a conversation. Oh, because also I don't think it's fair for an actor to say, for me to say to an actor, let's just improvise. Give me some interesting dialogue. It's not fair. So I actually had to sit down and then I wrote this thing about the useless superpowers, and then I showed it to him. I showed it to some of my friends, to Emily, and yeah, let's try this superpower thing, and that's in the film.
I loved it. All right, I think we can take some questions from the audience right here in the front. Just to repeat the question real quick, the question was about the process of the editing and how you worked on that.
Well, the film did not have a script, so it was really about the footage that I found, or that I was able to find. And this is an interesting process because sometimes you're looking for something, you don't find it, but you find something else, and then that's where you're going now. So it was really about listening to what the film wants you to do. For example, we began in very early beginning editing the downtown sequence with the cinemas, and it just felt too pragmatic, and it felt too much like a conventional documentary. And then, as I said, we realized we were going to move, and then I found the heart of the film, opening the film with my family home. But I thought that would last maybe 5 minutes, and it lasts 25 minutes. But that's where the film begins, and that's where I thought that's where the film is. That's how it should begin. And then all the other stuff, it just came out of intuition, really. But sometimes I wonder if it's not fair to say that it did not have a script, because it really did not have a script. My feature films with fiction, I actually write a proper script with all the dialogue and all the sequences laid out. But in a way, I think the film wrote itself. And the last sequence, of course, is the one I actually sat down to write. Even down to the shots. Classic. I think Taxi Driver is actually a major. I mean, if you want to see how a car is being shot with a driver and someone in the back seat, you just go to Taxi Driver. It's a completely different approach, of course. It's a completely different atmosphere, but in terms of shots, that's how I worked it out.
All the way in the back.
I can hear you.
question was about how your mother's research and work inspired Bacurau in your body of work.
Yeah, really tough to answer the second part of the question, because we never know how much of who we are is impacted by someone else. I can only imagine that a lot in terms of Joselice, my mother. I lost her very early, and I think she left quite a mark in the way I see things, because she was a historian and she was always pointing things out in terms of Brazil and why society works the way it works, or why it doesn't work, or why we have all the problems we have to deal with in terms of being the society we are. But one thing she did, and I always found this beautiful. She used this technique of oral history, which is basically recording at the time sound, because of course video in the 70s and 80s was not as easy to capture as it is today. But she used sound and cassette tapes. And she did a lot of research on workers. So workers, for her, they were as important as the bosses and the presidents and the directors and the people who gave the cards, basically. I think in September, when the film was on release in Brazil, in one of the Q&As, somebody pointed out something that I had not realized. And you learn a lot from Q&As and from the reaction that you get once you made a film. Somebody said that the presence of Alexandre in the film was very much in line with what she says about the whole idea of oral history. And of course I could have interviewed a major filmmaker, and he or she would say, oh, it was such a loss, losing those movie palaces. But instead we get Alexandre basically talking about his own experience as a worker in the cinema, and I really like that. His love for cinema is present, but it's very pragmatic, as in, I couldn't stand that shitty music anymore from The Godfather. But it doesn't mean that he didn't like the film. It's just that it was a torture for him, 4 months watching Michael do his thing. So yeah, it's so about the documentaries, and I think that there's a lot of physical truth in fiction. I mean, even if you're working with actors and fantasy and made-up scenarios, I think there's a lot of, well, at least in the films that I like and I admire, there's a lot of texture. I always tell this. I remember when I saw Taxi Driver on television in the late '80s, and it was the story of Travis, but it was really the story of the streets of that city. And I could make a list of 100 films where the texture is fiction, but it's reality, in fact, and I really like that. And it goes the same way for documentaries. You can see a documentary which is supposed to be the truth, but it's completely phony. It just doesn't ring true because it's playing by some agenda, So the notion of truth, I mean, this is a very old discussion in cinema, is very questionable.
Right here.
All right. Well, technically we do not have censorship in Brazil. The censorship that exists is basically that imposed by let's say age restrictions, and some producers want to avoid an 18 certificate or something like that. During the Bolsonaro years, I'm sorry to say that name here, there were some incidents with a very old idea of censorship, but that was so far out. I mean, it didn't make any sense. But back in the 60s and 70s, censorship was really heavy. A film like Hair, which I think is rated PG in the US, was rated 18 in Brazil, because it made the military look very bad, basically. And it was kind of libertarian. I think it's actually a very interesting film, Milos Forman's Hair. And it really touched the nerve in particularly in Recife, which is a very kind of progressive, politically progressive city, and that's what I thought that should be in the film. I should mention that story. But a number of very important films from the early 70s only got to Brazil in 79 and 80, when the dictatorship began to open up. Last Tango in Paris, Clockwork Orange, the Decameron by Pasolini. All these films took 7-8 years for Brazilians to see because of the dictatorship. So they were very kind of sensitive to, to the truth.
I think we have time for just one more question right there in the middle. Question is about the tour that he's been on, all the cinemas you visited that are on the brink of closing in Brazil and elsewhere in the state of cinemas, I guess.
It's not different from anywhere else in the world, and also in the United States. The ones that we got to keep, Recife is actually a very interesting city because we got to keep 2 of them. The other spectacular movie palace I did not put in the film is because it was in an endless 11-year renovation, and it was finally it's finally ready. It was finally ready 2 years ago. In fact, that's where we had the local premiere for the film, the Parque. What happened to those 2 cinemas was that the state government bought it and turned it into the amazing São Luís, which you see in the film, and the other one was bought by the city. I've just been to the AFI Silver in DC 3 weeks ago, and that's exactly the kind of thing that I see in many different places in the world, including Brazil. An institution, often non-profit, local state government or municipality takes care of one of these movie palaces and turns them into a place of diversity and incredible technical presentation, which is also the case of the São Luís. I spent 10 days in France just before coming to LA, and that's all I saw. I only did the premieres in these amazing government-funded great cinemas in little towns in Paris and Bordeaux, and so that's the way it should go, because I do not believe that these old movie palaces would fully function in terms of being a commercial cinema. Maybe in some city, given special circumstances, but these places, they should always be an investment in culture and in diversity, and that's how I see it in many different places, from Sydney to to Rio and France and Denmark. That's how it works.
I think that's all the time we have. I just want to thank Kleber one more time for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.